Have you ever watched a movie and been so profoundly convinced of and impacted by its greatness, and yet you felt like it flew under the radar or that its meaning was completely missed by critics? Well, today I am going to share with you a film that is this very thing for me. This is Dreams, written and directed by Akira Kurosawa. Now, in order for me to adequately explain what makes this film so special, I feel the need to share some background on its director, and I realize that the film buffs among you are almost certainly familiar with the name, but for, we'll say, the less learned in the subject, let me just start by saying that Akira Kurosawa is one of, and even arguably the greatest director of film who has ever lived. And if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. And this work of his is so special to me that I don't feel I can give it justice just by talking at you like this, so I'm going to do something a little different for this review. I've put together a sort of pseudo-documentary that I hope will shed some light on both what makes this director so important to the world of cinema, and why Dreams is one of the most unique works of his career. So from here, this is my look at the life of Akira Kurosawa, and my review of his film Dreams. I hope you enjoy it. Rembrandt, Monet, Picasso, Van Gogh, Michelangelo, Da Vinci. All artists whose names you've probably heard. Today the world of art is translated to the screen, and some of those names are now Spielberg, Kubrick, Scorsese, Hitchcock, Coppola, Leone. Before we begin, take a moment and see if you can think of your top 10 favorite movies. As we continue, see if you can write down or even keep in mind the names of each film's director. I'm willing to bet that at least one of them was inspired in some manner by the Japanese film legend Akira Kurosawa. In his early life, Kurosawa began his career of directing films during the latter half of World War II. The state of the world being what it was, early films of his would be labored by intense censorship, causing portions of his early successes to be lost forever. During this period, he would also meet his wife, an actress in an early propaganda film of his whom he would remain with until her passing in 1985. During the Allied occupation of Japan, Kurosawa would be forced by the studio he was under contract with to lend his talent to the direction of a film entitled Those Who Make Tomorrow. His portion of the movie was infamously completed in 1 week. He would later disown it, stating that it was a film made by a committee, and he understandably refused to count it amongst his other credited works. Not since its initial release has it been shown in Japan, and it has never been released in the United States. In 1946 came No Regrets for Our Youth, and would criticize the political oppression of the Japanese pre-war regime. It would not see an American release until 1980. The film currently holds 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. In 1948, Drunken Angel would be his first film in which Kurosawa believed he was able to express himself freely. It would experience rave reviews and wide critical acclaim. Again, currently, it holds 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. In 1950, the film Rashomon was released and received a mixed critical reception in Japan. However, when it was introduced internationally the following year, received high praise and awards from both Italy and the United States. At that time, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences did not have the award for Best Foreign Language Film, and yet in 1952 presented this film with the honorary award of Most Outstanding Foreign Language Film released in the United States during 1951. This movie was the inspiration behind the term Rashomon Effect, which is where multiple accounts are given of a single event that are contradictory and interpreted differently. This is because the film's story involves the murder of a samurai and the rape of his wife, and is told from 4 different perspectives that all appear self-serving. Another favorite film of mine that used this style of storytelling was Zhang Yimou's 2002 epic Hero starring Jet Li. In it, Li's character is asked to give an account of how he managed to single-handedly dispose of 3 of the Emperor's most wanted assassins. In the first interpretation, we hear his account. In the second, when he suspects Jet Li's character may be lying, we hear the Emperor's interpretation of the events and how he believes they actually transpired. Finally, in the last act, we are given a more truthful retelling. It just so happens to be one of my all-time favorite films, and you should definitely check it out if you haven't had the chance, but as you watch it, appreciate that it was Kurosawa's method that influenced the storytelling. In 1952, Ikiru was released. It again boasts a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes and is included in Roger Ebert's prestigious list of great movies. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Kurosawa directed several highly acclaimed film masterpieces that inspired many prolific filmmakers and their works that we continue to respect and admire today. In 1954, Kurosawa released what is arguably his greatest achievement in his first full-on samurai film, Seven Samurai. He received worldwide renown, and this time Japan also took notice. You could hardly blame them, since this was the most expensive film to come out of Japan at the time. Following that, in the late 1970s, a poll of Japanese film critics voted Seven Samurai as the greatest Japanese film ever made. There are a number of lists out there that cite this movie as one of the all-time greatest, and this is stapled into my own personal top 10 as well. For the newer film lovers amongst us, 2016's The Magnificent Seven, as well as its predecessor from 1960, are together based off of Seven Samurai. Again, currently, it holds 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. In '57, Throne of Blood was released as a reimagining of Shakespeare's Macbeth and received awards for Best Actor and Actress in Japan. In '58, Hidden Fortress was released. This was Kurosawa's highest-grossing film at the time, and again is highly acclaimed. If you want to know someone else who really likes this film, there's a little series called Star Wars. You might have heard of it. George Lucas acknowledges heavy inspiration and influence from Hidden Fortress, both in plot elements and storytelling.
He had borrowed from Wizard of Oz or Kurosawa films, or, he's just steeped in film lore.
The one thing about Hidden Fortress is it did influence me in doing Star Wars. The one thing that really struck me about Hidden Fortress, and I was really intrigued by, was the fact that the story was told from the two lowest characters. I decided that would be a nice way to tell the Star Wars story, which is take the two lowliest characters and tell the story from their point of view, which in the Star Wars case is the two droids.
Speaking of Star Wars, J.J. Abrams also said that he too drew inspiration from Kurosawa when making The Force Awakens. Care to guess the Rotten Tomatoes rating? Yep, 100%. In 1960, Kurosawa released another reimagining of Shakespeare's Hamlet in The Bad Sleep Well, 100%. In '61, Yojimbo was released with immensely high praise and was remade in 1964 as the spaghetti western classic, A Fistful of Dollars. Even the term remade here is used somewhat loosely because in this case the film is, well, suspiciously close to the source material. So much so, in fact, that it resulted in a lawsuit that Kurosawa would win. On the matter, he would say, "He made a fine movie, but it was my movie." As most with any cinematic background know, this film starring Clint Eastwood was his first appearance as the man with no name. This aspect too was inspired by Yojimbo in turn because the character Sanjuro takes his surname from a plant he's looking at when asked his name. This occurs again in the film's sequel, Sanjuro, which released in 1962 as another highest grosser in Japan and, surprise surprise, also holds a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, I personally have nothing against Sergio Leone. He is in essence the father of spaghetti westerns. But if he is the father, then perhaps, given this information, Kurosawa could be considered the grandfather. While Kurosawa experienced a lull in his career after this time, including a devastatingly humiliating experience on a Western collaboration, he still had at least two more masterstrokes in Kagemusha, released in 1980, and Ran in '85. Both were nominated and won several foreign language film awards. That being said, Ran, which he would call his best work, was curiously passed over in Japan, and Kurosawa's influence was gradually being overlooked. So much so that for his next project, Kurosawa would be unable to receive the funding from studios within his home country. Now just imagine that. Someone who has brought so much recognition to a country for filmmaking over the years, someone who has stamped their influence on filmmaking forever. And I don't think that this is an exaggeration.
This year, the Academy's Board of Governors has voted an honorary Academy Award to a man who many of us believe is our greatest living filmmaker.
All right, everybody, the category is film directors. Well, that's way too easy. It's Akira Kurosawa. Hi, I'm Pat Sajak, and if you're wondering what a TV game show host has to do with one of the finest directors in the history of the cinema, the answer is simple: not very much. In reality, I'm participating in this evening's gala simply because I'm but one of millions and millions of people around the world who have been entertained and moved and influenced by this great filmmaker and his work. It's not hard to understand why his work has influenced generation after generation of movie makers.
He's had a tremendous influence on my life and on my work.
One thing that distinguishes Akira Kurosawa is that he didn't make a masterpiece or two masterpieces. He made, 8 masterpieces.
In Hong Kong, we used to call him Akira the Emperor, the movie giant.
One of the greatest artists of the 20th century. Seminal in so many ways, not just for Japan, but for the whole world of cinema.
He just captures, there's a truth to it. He cuts through to the essence of person.
He was a true visionary, not just for Japanese, but for film lovers and students all over the entire world. It continues today to inspire all of us.
I have learned more from him than almost any filmmaker on the face of the earth.
Let me say it simply. I mean, Kurosawa was my master and so many others. The master of so many other filmmakers over the years. Kurosawa's films had an awe-inspiring power, physical and graphic. His indelible compositions in movie after movie seem to have been burned into the screen. For so many of us, he defined a sense of possibility in movies. He still does through the pictures he made.
Now that list you made from earlier, did it contain any of the names that I've listed so far? If not, could you say they were inspired by any of the names listed? If you answered yes, then it's only fair to concede at least some credit to Kurosawa, just as they do. This man, of whom these masters of film were all inspired, was unable to receive the funding in his home country for what is undoubtedly his most personal film project. For Dreams, Kurosawa turned to an American fan of his, Mr. Steven Spielberg, who convinced Warner Brothers as well as colleagues George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola to assist as producers. Martin Scorsese would also contribute by starring in the film. So now I believe we're ready to discuss the movie itself. First, what exactly is it about? It is a collection of 8 short films inspired by actual dreams Kurosawa claimed he had through the course of his life. Thus, each of these play out like dreams in often unintelligible ways, dropping us into situations without explanation, as well as often ending in ways that feel incomplete. To help you understand, let me make an easy comparison. Imagine you're walking through an art gallery, and it's exhibiting the works of one of the greatest artists who has ever lived. You stop at one and stare into it. Your mind begins to wander, and you begin to imagine the possibilities of the subjects depicted. What brought them to these conditions? And what did the artist have in mind when painting them? You wonder what inspired the artist in his choice of colors used, and what meanings he wanted us to derive from his works. This is the essence of Dreams. To summarize briefly each tale, in the first story we see a boy who witnesses a wedding between 2 foxes. In the second, we see another boy who encounters the spirits of an orchard that has been cut down. In the third, we observe 4 mountaineers through a torrential blizzard. In the fourth story, we follow a Japanese army commander as he faces the ghosts of his fallen comrades. In the fifth, we join one man's literal journey through the paintings of Vincent van Gogh. It's here he finds the artist and converses with him, and how appropriate it is that the role is portrayed by Martin Scorsese himself. In the next dream, we bear witness to the meltdown of several nuclear power plants that ignite Mount Fuji. And in the following after that, we find ourselves in a wasteland alongside a man who encounters another being who has become the product of nuclear holocaust. In the final dream, we join a traveler as he passes through a small village and speaks with an elder before observing a funeral ceremony for one of the villagers. It's interesting to also note that a nameless character played by Akira Kurosawa and identified in the script only as I is the one link that the latter stories all share. This character also wears a distinguishable sun hat in these chapters that was the same style that Kurosawa was known for wearing on set, as though he is more than hinting that this character is himself. By all accounts today, this would definitely be considered an art house film. In fact, to this date, I don't know if I've seen a movie that more accurately meets the definition. And as implied in its title, each of these should be observed as though we are watching an actual dream captured in film. While I'm at it, I'll go ahead and say that every single shot is literally like looking into a painting. To say the movie looks gorgeous is even a gross understatement. Now, this film received very modest reviews after its release, and it holds an approval rating currently of a mere 59% on Rotten Tomatoes. And this is why I believe Rotten Tomatoes and sites like it are best served as a gauge only and not your final decision maker. Films like Seven Samurai, Drunken Angel, Yojimbo, and Sanjuro are all admittedly more applicable to a wider audience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the same audiences will always agree on a different type of work from the same filmmaker. If you look again at your list of favorite films and directors, you're bound to see that likely every one of them has had at least a few movies that were held in less regard than others. But does that mean that there's nothing to be said about a film that rates so highly on a site like Rotten Tomatoes? No, that's not what I'm getting at. If it were, I would not have cited it so many times here. What I am saying is that it shouldn't necessarily be the determining factor on whether you see or even enjoy a movie. If you like a film that has a lower rating, it merely means that you fit into a smaller bracket of people who are of a like mind. Dreams is a movie intended for those who wish to peruse a very personal journey through the eyes of an artist, and in so doing, the journey becomes personal to them. In fact, when I watched this film, my own feeling was very similar to when I visited the Art Institute in Chicago. If you'll permit me a somewhat lofty but honest description, it was as though I was being immersed in something divine. During my first viewing, I sat with my wife who experienced this as her first Kurosawa film. She summarized her feeling by saying she felt privileged to have been allowed to share in the director's vision. If I had to put it into words myself, I would say that I was solemnly overwhelmed walking away from Dreams. There's a feeling of reverence whenever I think about this film, and it continues to stick with me every time I talk about it. It may not be for everyone, but I would say that this seems like a more appropriate time period for this movie than 1990 was. With the deep love of Miyazaki films that continues to grow and the appreciation of Japanese anime and culture continuing to rise, this feels like a great time to be aware of some of the predecessors that have inspired some of the favorites of today. And let me tell you now, they hold up. Dreams is rated PG for disturbing imagery and intensity. This one is definitely for the truest of filmmaking observers and art connoisseurs, but also, if studying film is a passion of yours, as it obviously is for me, and if you have an appreciation for art and imagination and can let go of the expectation of plot, I would definitely recommend this one. I've said before that the only person who should decide your enjoyment of a film is you. Not me, not another critic, and certainly not a website. While I may assign a score to a film, that does not guarantee your enjoyment should you decide to watch it. We're merely gauges that point you in a direction. Though always remember that some people, as with many forms of art, will not have a taste for what others may call beautiful. And there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with your favorite critic's opinion. In this case, I was deeply moved by this film, and its wondrous imagery is sure to have a lasting impact on me. I am giving Akira Kurosawa's Dreams a 5 out of 5. Thank you so much for watching. If you had a chance to see this film, please share your thoughts and comments below. I would love to hear from you. Also, by a happy fluke, I've posted this video just 1 week before the anniversary of Akira Kurosawa's birthday, so I hope you'll take a moment to join myself in remembering this wonderful director. In any case, have a great week. This has been Real Time with Joe.